Her husband abandoned her and her 3 children for another, younger millionaire woman. But be careful, because here begins the real change in Raul Erpa's life. What he did changed not only his fate, but that of thousands of women, while he ended up facing the worst twist of fate. That morning, the sun shone weakly through the frayed curtains of the simple house where Caroline lived with her 3 children. She had barely slept a wink at night, feeling a restlessness in her chest, as if something bad was about to happen. The coffee was getting cold on the table while the little ones played on the floor, oblivious to the storm that was about to fall upon their lives. It was then that the door suddenly opened. Raul came in quickly, with a different look in his eyes, a mixture of guilt and determination. Caroline, seeing the serious expression on her husband's face, felt a shiver down her spine. "We need to talk," he said, avoiding looking at her directly. "About what?" Caroline asked, crossing her arms. She already knew that tone of voice. Something wasn't right. Raul took a deep breath, as if he was gathering the courage to say what he had been rehearsing for days. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice heavy with a weight he didn't really seem to feel. Caroline blinked a few times, trying to absorb those words. "Leaving? What do you mean?" "I met someone else," he continued, finally looking her in the eye. "Her name is Mildred. I'm going to marry her." The silence filled the room like a brutal blow. Caroline's heart raced. She looked at her children, who were still playing on the floor, not understanding what was happening. Are you going to leave us? Are you going to abandon your children?" Her voice wavered, but her gaze was sharp, penetrating. Raul looked away. "Mildred is the daughter of the owner of the company where I work. With her, my life will be different. I will have stability, money, a better future." "A better future for who?" "Because it certainly won't be for your children," Caroline replied, feeling tears burn her eyes but refusing to let them fall. "I know it's hard to accept, but I need to think about my future too. And honestly, you're going to be fine. You've always been strong." He shrugged, as if that settled the matter. Caroline laughed, but it wasn't a humorous laugh. It was bitter, full of disbelief. "So that's it? Years of marriage, 3 children, and you just leave?" Raul said nothing. He just picked up the suitcase that was already packed and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned around one last time. "I hope one day you'll understand me." Caroline felt the ground disappear beneath her feet as she watched the man she once loved disappear through the door, leaving behind a broken woman and 3 children who would never understand why their father simply left. The days that followed Raul's departure were the hardest of Caroline's life. The silence in the house seemed heavier, colder. Her children's laughter no longer had the same sparkle, and their innocent eyes carried questions she couldn't answer. Money was scarce. With the little savings she had, Caroline bought only the essentials: rice, beans, and a little bread for the children. She cut her own portion in half to make sure the little ones ate well. At night, when they were asleep, she would sit at the kitchen table, staring at the piled-up bills, feeling a lump in her throat. "How am I going to manage everything?" she whispered to herself. In addition to the financial difficulties, there was the emotional pain. She wondered how a man could simply abandon his family, moving on as if nothing had happened. The answer came one unexpected afternoon. Caroline was hanging clothes on the line when she heard a knock on the door. When she opened it, her entire body froze. There stood Raul, well-dressed, in an elegant suit and with a satisfied smile on his face. He looked like a man who had never known hardship. "Can we talk?" he said, as if nothing had happened. Caroline closed her eyes. "What do you want, Raul?" He stepped inside uninvited, looking around. "I came to give you some news. I just got promoted. I'm now the general manager of the company." There was pride in his voice, but also a hint of teasing. He wanted Caroline to know how much his life had improved without her. She crossed her arms, trying to maintain her composure. "And why should I care about that?" Raul shrugged. I just thought you'd like to know. Maybe it'll help you understand why I did what I did. With Mildred, I have opportunities that I would never have had with you. Caroline felt a tightness in her chest, but she didn't let him see her pain. And your children? Do you remember them? Because since you walked out that door, you've never shown up again. Raoul looked away, as if that were an insignificant detail. I know you'll find a way. You've always been very resilient. Caroline held her anger inside her. There was no point in fighting. If you don't have anything useful to say, get out of my house. Raoul took one last look around, smiled, and said, "Good luck, Caroline." And just like the last time, he turned his back and left, leaving only the scent of his expensive perfume in the air. Caroline closed the door tightly, feeling her chest burn. Outside, the children were playing innocently. They still didn't know that their father had returned, nor that he had chosen a new life without them. Caroline took a deep breath and wiped away her tears before anyone saw them. The fight was just beginning. Days passed, and Caroline continued her daily struggle to keep her children fed and protected. She had no time to mourn. Money was tight, but her love for her children was immense. One afternoon, while she was preparing a simple dinner, she heard another knock on the door. Her heart raced. It couldn't be Raoul again, or could it? When she opened the door, there he was. But this time, he was wearing an even more refined suit, and his expression carried something different. Impatience. "Can we talk?" he asked, as if he still had some right to invade her life. Caroline crossed her arms. "Just tell me what you want." "Raoul, I don't have time for games." He took a deep breath as if he were about to announce something grand. "I'm getting married." For a moment, Caroline felt the ground disappear from under her. It wasn't that she still loved him, but the speed with which he was moving on without any remorse was like a knife piercing her heart. She held her head high. "With Mildred, I suppose." Raoul smiled at the corner of his mouth. "Yes. She's the daughter of the company owner, Caroline. That means my future is secure. I'll be more than just an employee. I'll have status, power, money." Caroline felt a wave of contempt rise up through her body. "And your children? What will become of them?" Raoul adjusted his tie uncomfortably. "They'll stay with you, of course. Mildred doesn't want children around. And, to be honest, I think it'll be better this way." Her answer came instantly. "Better for who? For you?" He sighed impatiently. "Let's not kid ourselves, Caroline. I'm not going back. There's no point in keeping ties with the past. I'm a new man now." The silence was heavy. Caroline felt her eyes burn, but she wouldn't let him see her pain. The truth was simple. Raoul had never loved anyone but himself. "So that's it? You'll never see your children again?" she asked, trying to understand his coldness. Raoul opened his arms, as if it wasn't a big problem. "What's done is done. Life goes on. Goodbye, Caroline." He turned and left without looking back. Caroline stood at the door, watching his silhouette disappear in the distance. Her breathing was heavy and her chest was tight. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she realized there was no more room for tears. Raoul was gone forever. Now everything depended on her. Night fell over the small house where Caroline lived with her children. Silence reigned, interrupted only by the soft sound of the children's breathing, who slept huddled together in the small bed. She, however, remained awake, sitting in front of the cracked mirror in the room. Her swollen eyes betrayed the tears she had shed earlier. Raoul's voice still echoed. In her mind, what's done is done. Life goes on. Goodbye, Caroline. She stared at her own reflection in the mirror. Her face looked tired. Her eyes carried the shadow of a love that had been mercilessly thrown away. Her long dark hair, which Raoul had always praised, now seemed like a weight that she carried around without meaning. She took a deep breath and picked up an old pair of scissors that she kept in the drawer. Her heart was beating fast. If life must go on, then let it be without the chains of the past. Without hesitating any longer, she grabbed a lock of hair and cut it. The sound of the scissors breaking the strands was almost liberating. Another cut, then another. The strands fell to the floor like fragments of the woman she had once been. Each cut represented a piece of pain, of humiliation, of submission to a man who had discarded her. When she was finished, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her hair was now short, unruly, unlike anything she had ever had. She touched the strands, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. A single tear ran down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was the beginning of something new. She stood up and walked to the door of the room where her children slept. She watched them for a moment, feeling a warmth in her chest. She was no longer just Raoul's abandoned wife. Now she was Caroline, the woman who would start over from scratch. The sun was already high when Caroline left home for another day of struggle. With 3 children to support and no help, she needed to find a way to earn money. Her savings were running out, and hunger was an enemy that could not be ignored. It was then that she got a job as a washerwoman. It was not what she had dreamed for herself, but at least it would put food on the table. Every morning she carried a heavy basin full of clothes and walked to the river, where other women also washed to earn a living. The work was tiring. Her hands became red and rough from contact with the water and soap, but she did not complain. As she scrubbed the fabrics, she thought of her children and the better life she wanted to give them one day. One sultry afternoon, Caroline was hanging out the laundry when her neighbor Carmen appeared at the door. "Caroline, dear, what was that haircut for your hair? Did you do it yourself?" Caroline ran her hand through her short locks and smiled sideways. "Yes, I needed a change." Carmen crossed her arms, thoughtful. "I love it. I'm tired of this boring hair. Could you cut mine too?" Caroline hesitated. She had never thought of it before. I could try." Carmen sat on a makeshift chair in the backyard, and Caroline picked up the old scissors she had used on herself. With careful hands, she began to cut her neighbor's hair, observing every detail, adjusting the length, shaping the hair harmoniously. When she was finished, Carmen looked at herself in the mirror and smiled broadly. "My goodness, it's perfect. I look like a different person." Caroline felt a twinge of pride. There was something magical about that moment, as if for a moment she had forgotten all her hardships. Carmen stood up excitedly. "Caroline, you have a gift. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to the other women. A lot of people will want to get their hair cut by you." Caroline laughed, not knowing if this could really turn into something big. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe fate was showing her a new path. Caroline was still trying to process what had happened the day before. Carmen, excited about her new haircut, had gone out saying she would talk to other women. But Caroline wasn't sure if anything would actually happen. However, she had barely finished hanging some clothes on the line when she heard a knock on the door. "Caroline, open up." It was Carmen, with a wide smile and accompanied by 2 women Caroline recognized from the neighborhood. "Carmen, what's wrong?" Caroline wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. "Caroline, these are Rosario and Leticia. I told them about my haircut and they want you to cut theirs too." Rosario, a middle-aged woman with long, faded hair, stepped forward. "I've always wanted to cut it short, but I never had the courage. After I saw Carmen's hair, I thought, it's now or never. Can you fix mine?" Leticia, younger, was fidgeting with her own hair with an air of doubt. "And I just wanted a tweak, you know? Something modern, but without changing too much." Caroline felt butterflies in her stomach. Until then, cutting Carmen's hair had been an impulse, something she had done without much thought. Now, with 2 clients in front of her, it all seemed more real. Sure, I can try," she said, trying to hide her insecurity. She picked up the same simple scissors and sat Rosario on a makeshift chair in the backyard. With steady hands, she began to cut. She watched the strands fall, carefully shaping each strand, adjusting the details. The short hair enhanced Rosario's face, who smiled as she looked at herself in the mirror. "Oh my God, that's wonderful." Rosario raised her hands to her face in amazement. "You look amazing, Rosario. Just look." Carmen turned her neighbor around so she could see better in the reflection in the window. Leticia, who had been hesitant before, smiled excitedly. "Now it's my turn. Caroline, do whatever you think is best." Caroline felt a warmth in her chest. As she cut Leticia's hair, she realized something she had never imagined before. She liked it. She liked seeing women smiling, feeling beautiful, confident. When she was finished, Leticia ran her fingers through the lighter strands and smiled. "You have a gift, Caroline." The next day, 2 more women showed up. The day after, 3 more. Soon, the entire neighborhood was talking about the haircuts Caroline had given them. Women who had never thought of changing their look were now willing to try them out, trusting in the talent of the new stylist in the neighborhood. And so, without her realizing it, Caroline began to gain recognition. Time passed, and Caroline watched her small clientele grow. What started with a few neighbors became something bigger. Local women now sought her out for haircuts, hairstyles, and even advice on appearance. The talent she had never explored before now became her greatest work tool. One day, while she was finishing a haircut in her backyard, an elegant woman dressed in an impeccable blazer appeared at the door. Her hair was neatly styled, but her gaze showed urgency. "You're Caroline, right?" the woman asked, looking at the scissors in her hands. "Yes, I am. Can I help?" Caroline replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "My name is Regina. I work in the organization of a large corporate event. I heard about you and your talent with hair. I need someone to groom the event's employees. Will you take the job?" Caroline blinked a few times, surprised. She had never done a job like this before. "Me? But how many people exactly?" 10 women. All must look their best for the Kensington Corporation Gala. The event is tomorrow night. Caroline's heart raced. This was a challenge she had never imagined she would face. Working for a large corporation, she didn't have a fancy salon or expensive equipment, just her scissors, a comb, and the courage she had cultivated over the past few months. But when she looked at Regina and saw how confident she was in her recommendation, something inside Caroline lit up. "I accept." The next day, Caroline arrived at the event venue, a luxurious ballroom in a renowned hotel. The atmosphere was completely different from what she was used to. Everything sparkled, from the imposing chandeliers to the dresses of the women who walked around the venue. The employees were waiting for her in a private room. One by one, they sat in front of her, trusting her to prepare them for the big night. With firm, precise movements, Caroline made subtle cuts, elegant hairstyles, and finished each one with a professional touch. As she worked, she felt an observant gaze coming from the door. "You are very talented." Caroline looked up and found a tall, sophisticated man dressed in an impeccable suit. He watched her with a discreet smile. "My name is Frederick Kensington. I am the owner of the company." Caroline was speechless for a moment. She was face to face with the man in charge of the event. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Kensington," she said, controlling her nervousness. Frederick tilted his head, still observing her work. "I see many talented people every day, but you have something special. Who knows? Maybe one day we can work together again." Caroline didn't know exactly what he meant by that, but something told her that this meeting would change her life forever. In the days following the event, Caroline couldn't get Frederick Kensington out of her head. His compliment had marked her in a way she couldn't explain. It was more than just a simple recognition. It seemed like he saw something in her that she herself didn't even know she had. The idea of having pleased the owner of the Kensington Corporation seemed like a distant dream, but that meeting hadn't left her mind. Then, a week later, Caroline received an unexpected phone call. "Hello, is this Caroline?" the male voice on. The other end of the line was unmistakable. "Yes, it's me," she answered, a little nervous, not knowing what to expect. "Hello, this is Frederick Kensington. I'd like to talk to you about a proposal." Caroline's heart raced. She could hardly believe she was talking to him again. "Proposal?" she asked, trying to keep her cool. "Yes. After watching you work at our company event, I was very impressed with your talent. So, I thought, Why not take that talent to the next level? I'd like to be the exclusive stylist for the Kensington Corporation. Caroline felt a wave of shock run through her body. Exclusive stylist for such a renowned company? She could barely process what she was hearing. I don't know what to say, Mr. Kensington. Her voice was shaky, but she forced herself to keep her composure. Frederick, please, let's be informal. Frederick? Caroline repeated, still trying to absorb the offer. This is pretty big. I'm just a woman who works alone at home with scissors and a comb. I don't know if I'm ready for something like this. Frederick smiled on the other end of the line, as if he understood her hesitation. Caroline, I see the potential in you. I'm not asking you to change who you are, but rather to take your work to the next level. The Kensington Corporation is a great opportunity, and I believe you have what it takes to do even more impressive work. Caroline's mind was in turmoil. She had never imagined that in such a short space of time, she would be called upon for such an important role. Insecurity still consumed her, but Frederick's voice was firm and encouraging. I accept, he said, finally feeling the weight of the decision. Frederick gave a low, satisfied laugh. Excellent, Caroline, I knew you would say that. Get ready for a new chapter in your career. We will support you every step of the way. As she hung up the phone, Caroline was silent for a few moments. Her heart was beating fast and a sense of accomplishment began to take hold of her. She knew that at that moment, her life had changed forever. From that moment on, she would no longer be a washerwoman or a makeshift hairdresser. She was about to become the exclusive stylist for one of the largest corporations in the country. Caroline's dream was coming true, and she was ready to embrace this new beginning. As the months passed, Caroline and Frederick began to see each other more frequently. At first, it was just work. She was the exclusive designer for the Kensington Corporation, and he was the man who had hired her for the job. But as time went on, something began to blossom between them. It was more than just a professional relationship. Something deeper was being cultivated in every conversation, in every glance they exchanged. Frederick was unlike anyone Caroline had ever known. He was a calm, generous man with an uncanny attention to detail. He listened patiently, and every word she said seemed to be valued. Unlike Raoul, who never had the patience to listen, Frederick made her feel seen, important, and above all, respected. One evening, after a long day at work, Frederick invited her to dinner at his house. Caroline hesitated for a moment, but accepted, convinced that it would be just a dinner between friends. She did not want their relationship to be misinterpreted under any circumstances. She was grateful for the opportunity he had given her, and she did not want it to be mistaken for something personal. When she arrived at the mansion, Frederick greeted her with a warm smile. The mansion was grand, but what struck her most was the peace that permeated every room. The hallways were wide, the walls were covered in artwork, and the soft scent of fresh flowers hung in the air. It was the kind of home that would make anyone feel small, but Caroline didn't. I'm so glad you could come, Caroline. I'm glad to see you outside of the office, Frederick said as he led her through the living room. It's always nice to see the personal side of the people you work with, isn't it? Caroline smiled, though her heart was beating faster than she would have liked. Frederick prepared a simple but delicious dinner. They talked about everything, about work, about their personal lives, about what they expected from the future. At one point, while they were enjoying dessert, Frederick watched her closely. Caroline, have you ever thought about what it would be like if you lived here? This house has a lot of space, and you could have your own space without having to leave everything that's going on. Caroline looked at him in surprise. She knew that Frederick's mansion was a status symbol, but she never imagined that he would consider something like that for her. I appreciate the offer, Frederick, but I can't accept it. I grew up learning that independence is everything for a woman like me. I don't want to lose that. Frederick looked at her, his gaze soft but understanding. I understand, Caroline. I just wanted you to know that you will always have a place here if you need it. It's not about dependence, but about being in an environment where you feel comfortable, without worries. Caroline smiled, touched by his kindness. I know, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. But for me, the freedom to choose my path and to live my life my way is what matters most. I've been through a lot to get to where I am now, and while I'm very grateful for everything you've done for me, I can't give that up. Frederick was silent for a few moments, looking at her. He could feel the sincerity in her words, and somehow it made him respect her even more. I respect that, Caroline. And more than that, I admire your courage. You have something about you that few people have. Your strength and determination are inspiring. I hope you never lose that. Caroline smiled, feeling more comfortable than she ever imagined. I don't intend to lose it, and I know that somehow I will find my own way, even if it means walking alone. That night, as Caroline said goodbye to Frederick and left the mansion, she felt a sense of peace. She knew she had made the right decision. He was a wonderful man, but her life was in her own hands, and she didn't want to give that. She was writing her own story now, and no one could take that away from her. Frederick watched her from the doorway of the mansion with a soft smile. He respected her decision, but he knew she had achieved something unique, something he wanted to protect. She didn't need anything from him to be great, but he was willing to do anything to support her on her journey. Over the next few months, Caroline and Frederick's relationship grew even stronger. As her professional life blossomed, with the success of her work as a fashion designer, Frederick began to see Caroline's potential in an even deeper way. She was not only a great professional, but someone with a unique vision and an impressive ability to transform whatever she touched. One afternoon, while they were in the company's office, Frederick looked at her with a sparkle in his eyes, as if he had an idea that could change everything. Caroline, I know you're already doing an amazing job for your employees, but how about taking it to the next level? How about opening your own salon, a place where you can showcase your talent in an even bigger way? Caroline looked at him, surprised but also touched by the idea. Frederick, I really appreciate your trust, but opening a salon, that takes a lot more than just knowing how to cut hair, right? Frederick smiled as if he already knew the answer. I know, but you have something that few have, Caroline. You have the ability to transform people, to give them not only a new look, but also a new sense of confidence. I believe in your potential, and I would like to invest in you. What do you think about having your own space? Frederick's offer seemed too good to be true, but Caroline wasn't the type to buy into empty promises. She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and caution. And do you really think I'm ready for this? A salon is not a small thing. It's a huge investment, not just of money, but of time and energy. Frederick approached her and, with a firm look, said, Caroline, you've already given everything you've got to get here, and I know you have what it takes to make this a reality. I want to be the support you need to take this step. Let's do this together. What do you think? Caroline felt butterflies in her stomach, but also something stronger. An impulse. She knew this could be the beginning of something great. She couldn't let the opportunity slip away. Okay, Frederick, let's do this. And so, in a short time, the salon was founded. It was planned with love as an extension of Caroline's soul. It was more than just a place to cut and style people's hair. It was a place where women and men could find not only a new look, but also a new beginning. The space was decorated in soft, modern tones, combining comfort with sophistication. Every detail reflected Caroline's personality, simple, elegant, and full of life. The salon quickly became a success. Word of mouth worked its magic, and soon Caroline began to see the lines of clients growing longer every day. Women who wanted more than just a haircut. They wanted to reinvent themselves, just as Caroline had done. And as always, Caroline was ready to offer not only a new look, but a new sense of self-esteem and confidence to each of them. It was as if she had touched the heart of each person who walked through the door. Their life stories intertwined with hers, and Caroline, with her unique ability to listen and understand, became more than a stylist. She became a source of inspiration. Within her first month of opening, the salon was already winning local awards. and fashion magazines began to feature articles about Caroline and her work. In one of the interviews, she was asked what she considered the secret of her success. With a shy smile, she replied, "The secret is believing in people. I don't just cut hair, I transform lives. And this transformation begins in the heart of each person." Frederick, as promised, was by her side every step of the way. But now, Caroline no longer needed him to feel strong. She had created something, on her own, with her passion and dedication. Success was no longer a distant idea, but something tangible and real. Caroline's salon became a symbol of overcoming and courage, not only for her, but for everyone who passed by. The woman who had once been abandoned and saw her life fall apart was now in a position where she could help other people rebuild theirs. And all of this began with Frederick's trust in her. Caroline's success was at its peak. The salon was a true haven for transformations, not just aesthetic ones, but entire lives. Women and men of all ages were passing through, looking not only for a new look, but for an emotional renewal. Caroline was living the most rewarding moment of her career. She had overcome obstacles that, in the past, seemed impossible to overcome. One ordinary day, while Caroline was having one of her haircuts, an elegantly dressed woman walked into the salon. Her steps were firm, and she exuded an unshakable confidence. Caroline didn't have time to look at her completely, as she was busy with another client, but the look on the woman's face, with her impeccable blonde hair and determined gaze, caught her attention. The woman approached the counter and asked, "I would like to schedule a haircut, please." "Of course, with pleasure," Caroline replied, with a welcoming smile, not knowing who was in front of her. The woman looked at her with a smile, but her gaze was curious. "I saw your work in a magazine recently, Caroline. They say you are an artist when it comes to haircuts. I need something new, something that changes everything." Caroline smiled, feeling a surge of pride. She was used to hearing compliments now, but the woman's sincerity and admiration touched her in a different way. "So let's transform this look. You've come to the right place for a radical change." As Caroline worked, cutting and shaping with precision, the woman who introduced herself as Mildred began to chat, as if it were natural. She talked about life, about her relationships, and somehow a family story began to emerge. Mildred spoke lightly, but her tone had something vulnerable about it. "I really thought he was going to be the man of my life," Mildred said with a sigh, looking at her reflection in the mirror as Caroline worked. He had everything I was looking for in a man. But now I see things differently. I don't know if he's the right man for me after everything that's happened." Caroline, with her ability to listen and understand people, didn't show any reaction, but her hands shook slightly as she cut Mildred's hair. Raoul. The name echoed in her mind, but she maintained her composure, as she always did with her clients. Mildred seemed completely oblivious to the fact that Caroline was Raoul's ex-wife, and perhaps it was even better that way. "I know how hard it is to realize that what felt right in the end isn't. But sometimes we need pain to find our true strength," Caroline replied softly, not wanting to invade Mildred's emotional space, but offering some of her wisdom. Mildred smiled when she heard this. "You're right. I was so obsessed with the idea of a perfect life with him that I didn't realize how much I was losing myself. He wasn't everything I expected." She laughed bitterly, looking at the mirror. "And now it feels like I'm starting from scratch, and I really don't know what to do with my life anymore." Caroline, without mentioning Raoul's past, continued to work with her usual precision. The conversation continued, but something inside her tightened when she heard those words. She knew very well what Mildred was feeling. She had lived it herself. The pain of realizing that the man she had placed so much hope in was not the partner she thought he was. When the cut was finished, Caroline put the finishing touches, and with a smile on her face said, "Ready for a new phase? I think now is the time to look to the future." Mildred looked in the mirror and, for the first time, looked genuinely pleased. She touched her hair, straightened the strands, and smiled at Caroline. "It was perfect. I needed something new, something that really represented me, and I think that starts now." Before leaving, Mildred turned to Caroline and unexpectedly said, "Oh, and I want to thank you. This cut was more than just a change of look. I really feel like I can start over now. You've given me something I've been searching for a long time." Clarity. Caroline, with a discreet smile, just nodded. She knew that the work of transformation was much more than what was seen. It was about helping people find themselves again from the inside out. As Mildred left, Caroline stared in the mirror. She had seen something in Mildred's eyes, a hidden pain that she recognized well. But what touched her most was the irony of the situation. Mildred, without knowing it, had just gotten a haircut from Raoul's ex-wife, the man who, with his selfish choices, had broken her heart and those of so many other people. But Caroline didn't feel anger or resentment. She felt something deeper, an understanding. What happened to her in the past no longer defined her life. Now she had something much more valuable: independence, strength, and, above all, the ability to transform lives. It was no longer about Raoul, about Mildred, or about what had happened. It was about who she had become. Mildred, in turn, was also in a process of transformation. She didn't know that the woman who cut her hair was actually Raoul's ex-wife, and maybe it would be better that way. For in a silent way, both were freeing themselves from their own bonds. The afternoon was peaceful in Caroline's salon, like so many others. The soft sound of scissors cutting strands of hair mixed with the buzz of conversations and laughter from customers, all immersed in their transformations. Caroline was in her element, surrounded by the trust of her clients and the positive energy she herself had cultivated over the years. But something was about to change. When the door to the hall opened, a cool breeze came in, bringing with it the elegant figure of Frederick Kensington, accompanied by a lady with white hair and a wise look. She looked a little older than him, but with a serene charm that radiated an almost magical presence. Caroline didn't need long to realize who they were. Frederick was already a familiar face, and the lady at his side, well, that lady carried something special, an energy that made her stand out immediately. "Caroline, this is my grandmother, Grace," Frederick said with a smile. "She came to visit your salon. I think you'll love meeting her." Grace looked at Caroline with a gentle smile, but her gaze was attentive. She seemed to be analyzing every detail of the environment, every movement, with a slight but profound curiosity. Caroline, surprised by the visit, stood up quickly, already recognizing the importance of that moment. Grace was the matriarch of the Kensington family, and her presence there was not trivial. "It's such a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Grace," Caroline said, extending her hand with a welcoming smile. "I'm honored by your visit." Grace smiled, taking Caroline's hand firmly. "The pleasure is mine, my dear. I've always heard about your work, and today I decided to come and check it out up close." Frederick looked at Caroline with a soft expression, but Caroline felt a hint of nervousness. Grace, with her attentive gaze, seemed to assess the young businesswoman with a depth that made her feel almost vulnerable. But soon Grace removed any shadow of tension by saying, "I was thinking a haircut, something that's different from the usual, something that makes me feel refreshed," Grace said with an unflappable calm. "I know you're excellent at what you do, Caroline, so why not give me the chance?" Caroline was speechless for a moment, feeling the weight of the request. It wasn't just a haircut. For Grace, it felt like a rite of passage, a way to start something new. A new beginning for her, perhaps, or an attempt at a fresh start after so many years of her life as a matriarch. "It would be an honor, Mrs. Grace," Caroline replied with a sincere smile. "Let's get started then. I want to do something that matches your elegance, but also brings that feeling of renewal you're looking for." Grace settled into the chair, and Caroline began preparing everything for the cut. Frederick watched with a slight smile on his face, as if he were admiring Caroline's skill, but also with a touch of affection at seeing his grandmother, who rarely showed vulnerability, giving herself to that transformation. During the cut, Grace looked closely at the mirror, but her gaze was distant, as if she was reflecting on the past years and next steps. The lightness of the cut seemed to bring her a feeling of freedom, something Caroline couldn't help but notice. "I didn't know cutting your hair could be so symbolic," Grace said, breaking the silence that had settled in the room. "Life sometimes demands change, doesn't it? I see so much of myself in what you're doing, Caroline. There's a quiet beauty in change, and I see you understand that." Caroline smiled, feeling a deeper connection with Grace. It wasn't just about a haircut. It was about the meaning this gesture carried for her. It was about rebirth, about new possibilities. "I understand, Mrs. Grace. Sometimes a simple gesture of external transformation can reflect the internal transformation we are seeking. And this often brings a sense of freedom." As Caroline finished cutting, the room seemed to be enveloped in a kind of tranquil energy. When Grace finally looked in the mirror, the smile that appeared on her face was one of pure satisfaction. His hair was now shorter, lighter, and there was something new in his eyes. "Perfect," Grace said, touching her freshly cut hair gently. "I feel renewed, Caroline. This cut symbolizes exactly what I needed." Frederick smiled, proud of his grandmother and Caroline's skill. He knew that that moment would mark the beginning of an even closer phase between Caroline and the Kensington family. It was a moment of unity, respect, and mutual recognition. Caroline had landed more than one important client that day. She had gained the trust of a woman who, for generations, had been the matriarch of one of the city's most influential families. Grace stood up from her chair and turned to Caroline, her gaze now full of appreciation. "You have something special. Caroline, keep doing what you do. People need people like you." Caroline was speechless, touched by the sincerity in Grace's words. She knew that this moment was much more than a simple visit from an important client. It was the beginning of a new phase, of a true connection between her and the Kensington family, which over time would become increasingly stronger. And so, in that room transformed by her art and dedication, Caroline took another step on her journey. A journey of growth, overcoming, and new possibilities. And most importantly, a journey where transformation was much more than just changing your appearance. It was about changing the lives of each person who crossed your path. The fashion event was in full swing. Lights twinkled, and the sound of lively music filled the sophisticated atmosphere of the event hall. The guests, all impeccably dressed, walked through the corridors, commenting on the latest trends and admiring the creations of major brands. Caroline, now a successful fashion designer, was beaming. She wore an elegant dress, but with the simplicity that made her unique, always standing out for her discreet elegance. She was with Frederick, watching the models walking down the catwalk, when something made her stop. A familiar face in the crowd. She frowned, and the years of suffering and disillusionment came flooding back. Raoul. He was there, surrounded by a team, as an assistant to one of the stylists who had been hired for the event. He seemed like a different man, but not that much. His presence still carried something that, despite everything, was unmistakable. Raoul, realizing that Caroline had spotted him, hesitated for a moment. He took a step towards her, his gaze filled with regret. "Caroline," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. I didn't expect to find you here." Caroline looked at him coldly, not letting any emotion show. She no longer allowed herself to feel anything for that man. "Raoul," she replied with calculated calm, "what are you doing here?" Raoul seemed disconcerted by her indifference. He took a step closer, trying to conquer her space with words. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Everything that happened, the lies, the betrayals, I wasted so much time trying to find what would never be possible, and now I see that I lost the most important thing in my life. You, Caroline. I miss you." Caroline looked at him with a firm, almost challenging look. She had already overcome that chapter in her life. The suffering he had caused, the broken promises, and the pain he had left behind, none of it could be erased. With words, "Do you miss me?" Caroline repeated, her voice now firmer, almost cutting. "And where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I had to raise our children alone, fight to survive, and start everything over from scratch. You have no idea what you meant to me, Raoul. You have no idea. She took a step forward, approaching him. His eyes were filled with a mix of pain and strength. She was at peace with herself, but the simple fact of seeing him there, trying in some way to get back into her life, made her question how much he had really lost her. You can't just show up after all this time and try to come back as if nothing had happened. You lost the right to be part of my life, and our children's, a long time ago. You made your choices, Raoul. Now you have to live with them. Raoul was silent, regret written all over his face. He knew there was nothing he could say to change Caroline's decision. The woman he had left behind had turned into someone strong, independent, and he could no longer reach her. I just wanted the chance to show that I can change, he said softly, almost like a whisper. But I understand if you can't forgive me. Caroline looked at him one last time with an expression of compassion but no regret. You already had your chance, Raoul, and you chose another path. Now it's time to move on. I'm already moving on with my life. With a subtle gesture, she turned, returning to Frederick, who was watching from afar, with an attentive but respectful look. Raoul stood still, his face pale and his posture rigid, as Caroline walked away from him without looking back. On the way back to Frederick, Caroline felt a slight sense of relief. Raoul's weight, the shadow of the past, was finally lifting. She had freed herself. She knew that now her life was in his hands. She had overcome everything he had done, and was now free to follow her own path. Frederick noticed the change in Caroline's expression as she approached him. He knew something had happened, but he didn't ask. He just looked at her with respect, knowing that night Caroline had made an important decision. She had shown the world, and herself, that there was no more room for the past in her life, and that the future, with all its possibilities, was the only path she was willing to follow. The big day had arrived. The sky was clear, with few clouds, and the sun shone softly as if the universe was celebrating along with them. Caroline was at her best, but in a way she never imagined possible. She, who had previously struggled to make ends meet, was now about to marry Frederick Kensington, the man who had become much more than a simple business partner. He had become a companion, a friend, someone who loved her deeply without wanting to change who she was. The ballroom was decorated with fresh flowers and soft candles, creating a warm yet elegant atmosphere. Classical music played in the background, as guests who were close friends and family settled into their seats. Frederick was there in his dark suit with his wide smile and radiant eyes. He looked at Caroline with admiration, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Caroline, meanwhile, looked stunning in her wedding dress. It was simple but elegant, with subtle details that reflected her personality. Nothing exaggerated, but very beautiful and charming. When she entered the hall, all eyes turned to her. But it wasn't just the dress that caught attention. It was the sparkle in her eyes, the confidence in her posture, and the way she seemed completely at ease with herself. She was at peace, ready to take this important step. Although there was much love between her and Frederick, Caroline did not want to lose her independence, this essential part of who she was. She knew that true happiness lay in the harmony between maintaining her own identity and, at the same time, sharing her life with someone who respected that. Frederick was waiting for her at the altar, his gaze full of affection and pride. When Tabiwain, she reached him. He took her hands gently as if he didn't want to break the spell of the moment. Silence took over the room, as if everyone was eager to hear the words that would change their lives forever. The celebrant began to speak, but Frederick's voice echoed in Caroline's heart as he said with a shy and genuine smile, "Caroline, from the first moment I saw you, I knew that my life would never be the same. You showed me that love is not about perfection, but about acceptance, respect, and mutual support. You made me believe that we can have the best of both worlds, our independence and our unity. I love you, more than words can express." Caroline felt her eyes fill with tears, but they were tears of happiness. She knew this was the moment she could finally rest, knowing that her life would no longer be a constant struggle. Frederick did not see her as a weak woman or a dependent. He saw her as an equal, as a partner, and it filled her with a peace she had never experienced before. She looked at him and in a firm but emotional voice replied, "Frederick, I never imagined that one day I would get here, but today by your side I can say with certainty, you have become my greatest happiness. I accept, with love, sharing my life with you, maintaining my identity, my choices, and above all, the mutual respect we have always had. I love you, and I'm grateful for you showing me that it's possible to be loved for who I really am." The celebrant, who watched everything with a tender smile, then declared them officially married. The guests' applause echoed around the room, but to Caroline, it all seemed like a dream. Not only was she starting a new life with Frederick, but in a way, she was also reaffirming her own strength and identity. However, what was even more beautiful about that moment was the way Frederick not only accepted, but also celebrated Caroline's independence. He knew she was a strong woman, and instead of trying to mold her according to his desires, he encouraged her to follow her own dreams, maintain her career, and continue to be the incredible woman she always was. Their union did not mean subordination, but a balanced partnership where both could grow and shine. The reception was a celebration of love and unity, but also of personal achievements and the respect that existed between Caroline and Frederick. They danced together, laughing and having fun, while friends and family celebrated the new phase of their lives. But more important than the party was what they knew between themselves, that now they were truly together, sharing everything they had built without giving up who they were. Caroline, with Frederick by her side, felt that everything she had been through, the pain, the struggle, the abandonment, had been necessary for her to get there. Now she knew she could have the best of both worlds, the strength of her independence and the softness of a deep, true love. She had finally found the balance she was looking for, and when she looked at Frederick, she knew that this was the best phase of her life. She was ready for whatever came next, but she knew that with him, no obstacle would be too great. And so, Caroline and Frederick began a new story, together, but still true to themselves as it always should be. 20 years had passed since Caroline and Frederick were married, and life had been kind to them. Caroline was now an accomplished woman with a successful beauty salon, a loving family, and a solid career. Frederick was by her side, always supporting her choices, celebrating her achievements. Their children, now adults, had grown up in a stable, loving home. The pain of the past, Raoul's betrayal and the difficulties she faced before, had been left behind, like a distant memory that no longer defined her. But fate, with its strange way of writing stories, brought an unexpected twist. One autumn morning, news reached Caroline's ears that made her pause for a moment, perplexed. Raoul, the man who had abandoned her and destroyed the trust she had in her relationships, was in serious condition in the hospital. He had been found on the streets, homeless and destitute, completely broken down. The man who had once had everything, a promising career, a comfortable life, and a devoted wife, was now at the mercy of the life he chose, separated from his former family and forgotten by society. Surprise took over Caroline, but what she didn't expect was that 20 years later, her own blood, her daughter Rosalinda Jasmine, was directly involved in Raoul's life. Rosalinda, with her eyes fixed on the future, has always been dedicated to medicine, and on that day, she had been called to care for a patient in critical condition. When she entered the hospital room and looked at the patient, her eyes widened. Raoul's face, although aged and marked by a life of hardship, was unmistakable. She had seen that face many times in her memories, but she had no idea that fate would bring him face to face with her after so many years. "It's him." "It can't be," Rosalinda murmured. While the doctors and nurses ran around him trying to stabilize him, she approached the bed and, upon examining Raoul's vital signs, noticed that he had serious damage to his vital organs. His condition was critical, and the only thing that could save him at that moment was a plasma transfusion. Rosalinda didn't hesitate. She knew what she needed to do. "I can help. I'm a match," she told the medical team, not knowing how difficult this moment would be for her emotionally. However, there was something even more disconcerting that she did not know until that moment. Raoul, in his ignorance and in the depths of his desolation, had never known of his daughter's existence. Rosalinda, as a dedicated doctor, had lived her entire life without knowing exactly what had happened to her biological father, as Caroline had always protected her from that part of the story. She grew up believing that Raoul was an absent figure, but now the truth was about to come out in a shattering way. The plasma transfusion was performed, and as the hours passed and Raoul slowly began to regain consciousness, he found himself immersed in a reality he could not believe. When his eyes opened and he looked at Rosalinda, something in his mind tried to understand what was happening. He tried to move, but his condition was still fragile. Who are you?" Raoul asked weakly, his eyes confused, looking at the woman beside him. Rosalinda, who was still holding his hand, took a deep breath. She knew that moment would change her life forever. "I am Rosalinda Jasmin," she replied, her voice firm, but also full of a mix of pain and compassion. "I'm your daughter, Raoul. I am your biological daughter." The words fell like an enormous weight on Raoul, who remained silent for a long time, trying to assimilate what he had just heard. He, the man who always believed he was sterile, now discovered that he had a daughter who saved him, who gave him the chance to continue living. He tried to speak, but words seemed to fail him. "No, it can't be," he mumbled, his eyes watering. I didn't know, Rosalinda. Thought I was sterile, that I would never have children. I didn't even know you existed." Rosalinda looked at him with a mixture of compassion and sadness. "You made so many bad choices, Raoul, and they affected much more than you. Realize, you abandoned us, Mom, me, and now look where you've ended up. I'm not a doctor to judge you, but to help. And I'm helping you because, despite everything, you're my father, and therefore it is my duty to save you." Raoul, breathing heavily, closed his eyes and, for a brief moment, felt the weight of his actions sinking into his chest. He knew there was nothing more he could do to repair the damage done over the years. The time lost with his family, with his children, could not be recovered. I'm sorry, Rosalinda. I didn't know. I failed you all," he said with a broken voice, almost without strength. "I don't deserve what you're doing for me." Rosalinda watched him for a moment, and despite the pain she felt for everything that had happened, she knew that her mission was greater than hatred or resentment. She wasn't there to judge him, but to give him the chance to live, because somewhere, inside, she believed that no one should die without the chance for redemption. You still have time, Raoul. The rest of your life can be different if you really want it. While the doctors continued the care, Rosalinda withdrew for a moment, with the feeling that her own life, in some way, was being redefined by that unexpected encounter. She had saved the life of a man who, in his youth, had abandoned her without even knowing of her existence. But at that moment, Rosalinda also knew that saving a life didn't just mean healing the body. Perhaps in that meeting, she was also giving Raoul the chance to meet again with himself, and perhaps one day, with his family. After the incident at the hospital, where Rosalinda had saved the life of Raoul, the man she had never known was her biological father. Something inside her changed. Even after so many unspoken words, so much accumulated resentment, a feeling of relief and perhaps even peace began to form. She knew there was still a lot to be resolved, but the fact that Raoul was alive and recovering gave her the chance for a new beginning. Time passed, and Raoul, although marked by a life of mistakes and regrets, found himself faced with an opportunity he never imagined he would have, a second chance. But first and foremost, he needed forgiveness. Forgiving yourself, perhaps, was the biggest challenge of all. Meanwhile, Caroline, who had always been the family's stronghold, maintained her position as a protective and strong mother. She had built her life again. Her career was at its peak, and she knew she couldn't let the past define her. But upon learning of Raoul's condition, a whirlwind of emotions passed through her. She had suffered a lot because of him, and it wasn't something that was easily forgotten. However, something in his heart told him that perhaps it was time to take the final step towards peace. Not for him, but for herself. One morning, Caroline received an unexpected phone call. It was Rosalinda. "Mom, you need to know what happened. Raoul. He's better. He recovered. And he asked me for forgiveness. I know it's difficult, but he's trying to find himself," said Rosalinda, in a voice that carried a tone of confusion and at the same time, compassion. Caroline was silent, for a moment, allowing Rosalinda's words to settle in her mind. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the full weight of those years of pain and anger, but also feeling a lightness for the first time. Life, despite everything Raoul had done to her, had brought her to a point where she no longer wanted to carry the burden of hatred anymore. Maybe it was time to break free. "I know, daughter, I know," Caroline replied softly. "I'm not ready to see him yet. But if you think he deserves a chance, I trust you." It was with these words that the family began to heal. Rosalinda, with the help of her brothers, convinced Caroline to take the final step and allow Raoul to be part of their lives again. Not in the same way as before, but in a way that was healthy for everyone. Raoul, despite being a destroyed man, marked by time, humbly accepted Caroline and her children's offer. They bought a small but welcoming house where Raoul could start over. A simple place, but for him, it meant a second chance to live with dignity, something he never imagined he would have. Upon entering the house, Raoul looked around and found himself in a space where generosity and forgiveness had come together. He, who no longer believed in anything, now had an opportunity he never imagined. He knew he wouldn't have his children's instant forgiveness nor Caroline's immediate love, but the chance to live there, in peace, was more than he could ever hope for. "I don't know what to say," said Raoul with teary eyes, looking at his children and at Caroline, who, even from a distance, was watching him with a gentle but cautious look. "You don't need to say anything, Father," Rosalinda replied with a soft smile. "You now have a chance to do right, and that's what matters." Caroline, who was a little further away, observed the moment with a serenity she had never imagined. She didn't know if it would be possible, but she was there, looking at Raoul, and thinking about how much forgiveness meant not just an absolution for him, but also a liberation for herself. Time passed, and little by little Raoul adapted to his new life. He no longer had the luxury or stability he had had when he was with Caroline, but what he had now was something much more valuable, an opportunity to rebuild his life, to rebuild his relationship with his children, and most importantly, with himself. He rose from the rubble with the understanding that the past could not be changed, but the future was still within his reach. Caroline, in turn, continued to live her life, with Frederick and their children, thriving in both love and work. But she knew that the real victory, the one that made her feel at peace with herself, was forgiveness. She had done what she thought was right for herself and her family, and it brought her a deep sense of fulfillment. The story of Caroline, Raoul, and their children became a story of overcoming, of new beginnings, and of forgiveness. Raoul now lived with dignity. Caroline found true peace, and his children, albeit cautiously, gave Raoul the opportunity to redeem himself, to be the father he had never been, but could still be. And the lesson that remained was clear. To forgive is not to forget, but to free yourself from the weight of the past, so that the future can be lived with more lightness and hope. The story ended with a new beginning, with a cycle that closed but also opened up to new possibilities. A cycle of life, love, and above all, forgiveness. Did you like this story? So leave your like, subscribe to our channel, activate the notification bell. Stay tuned, and I will bring another exciting story for you at any moment. Until next time.